Stop. That's enough.
He just tore the dress off his pregnant ex-wife, right here, in front of everyone. Those were the first words that sliced through the ballroom, whispered by someone in the crowd, but loud enough to echo across the marble floor like a siren. And once that whisper broke loose, the whole room tilted, as if the world had stopped turning for a full, terrible second. The music didn't cut off. The band kept playing like they hadn't seen a thing. Glasses stayed raised, forks hovered midair, but every pair of eyes locked on the same nightmare unfolding center stage. Ayanna Monroe, 7 months pregnant, stood frozen under the crystal chandeliers, the shredded pieces of her dress falling around her feet like dying petals. Her hands instinctively covered her belly, not out of shame, no, not that, but out of protection. A mother's first instinct, even in her darkest moment. And right across from her stood the man who did it, Sebastian Graves, billionaire tech CEO, America's golden boy, the symbol of Black excellence on magazine covers from coast to coast. Tonight, he wasn't excellent, he wasn't elegant, he wasn't powerful. He was cruelty in a tailored suit. You could taste the shock in the air. It was sharp and metallic, like the moment before lightning hits. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, because this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. He meant to hurt her, and he wanted witnesses. But what Sebastian didn't know, what none of the guests in their $1,000 outfits or the journalists crouched behind cameras understood, was that his moment of domination was about to become the moment his empire cracked. Because before Ayanna could collapse, before a single tear could fall, another voice rose from the far side of the ballroom. Hey, stop, that's enough. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't the voice of someone with money or power behind her. It belonged to a waitress, a young Black woman in a crisp white shirt, red vest, black apron tied neatly at the waist, and a gold name tag with letters too faded for anyone to read. Her name was Janelle Carter, 23. Beautiful smile, bright eyes, strong posture. A girl most people dismissed without a second thought. But tonight, she stepped forward, and the entire room shifted. People didn't recognize it yet, but they were watching the first crack in Sebastian's perfect image. They were watching someone who wasn't supposed to matter become the one person who mattered most. If you're still here, listening, watching, feeling that tightness in your chest, it means something in this story speaks to you. Maybe you've seen cruelty disguised as confidence. Maybe you've watched someone powerful hurt someone who couldn't fight back. If that's you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps these stories reach people who need them, people who need to remember they're not alone. Now, let's go back. Before the dress ripped, before the cameras exploded, before the truth burned through the internet. Let's see how this all began, and how a waitress nobody noticed became the woman who changed everything. Her name was Janelle Carter. Most people wouldn't remember that, not because it wasn't worth remembering, but because she'd spent most of her life in the background. That girl with the quick smile, the steady hands, and the yes ma'am voice. The one who brought your drinks without making a sound, who kept her head down because it was safer that way. She was 23. Young, sure, but already older than she should have had to be. Janelle grew up on the south side of Atlanta, in a 2-bedroom apartment with her grandmother, her little brother, and not much else. Her mother passed when Janelle was 10. Sudden heart failure, no warning, no goodbye. Her father never showed up. Grandma May raised her the only way she knew how. Strict, loving, and with an iron backbone made from years of being underestimated. Be twice as good, baby, she used to say. Twice as smart, twice as kind, and never let 'em see you break. Janelle took those words to heart. She graduated high school at the top of her class, got into Georgia State on a partial scholarship, majored in communications with a minor in sociology. She wanted to tell stories, real ones, stories that mattered. But tuition was steep, and life didn't pause for ambition. So, between classes, she worked. coffee shops, bookstores, front desks, and most recently, banquet serving at the Hanover Grand, one of Atlanta's most prestigious hotels. That's where she learned to walk in silence, smile on cue, memorize orders in seconds, and disappear when necessary. The uniform didn't make her feel invisible. The way people looked through her did. White shirt, perfectly ironed. Red vest, snug but respectful. Black skirt, slightly above the knee. Apron tied tight at the waist. Hair always up, high bun, neat edges. Minimal makeup, no earrings. Just the name tag. Gold, oval-shaped, engraved once in cursive, but now worn so badly you could barely make out the J. She moved like someone who knew she didn't have the luxury of mistakes. At the Hanover, she was just staff. That's what the clipboard said. Server number 3. Her job was to refill water glasses, clear plates, and stay out of the way. But Janelle noticed everything. She noticed which guests looked her in the eye and which looked past her. She noticed how some said thank you like it tasted bad, while others never said it at all. She noticed the women who clutched their purses tighter when she passed, and the men whose eyes lingered too long on her legs. And still, she showed up. Every shift. Every time. Not because she wanted to be a waitress forever, but because she knew every step forward counted. Because she had dreams bigger than uniforms and name tags. And because her brother, Malik, was 15 and counting on her to keep the lights on and the fridge full. That Friday morning, the day of the Graves wedding, Janelle woke up before the sun. She ironed her clothes, packed an extra pair of flats in her tote, and kissed her grandma on the forehead before heading out. The assignment came through late. VIP private event. All staff to arrive by 10 a.m. Full dress code. Professional conduct required. No client name, no details, just another fancy Atlanta wedding. Or so she thought. When she arrived, the hotel buzzed with a different kind of energy. Security everywhere. Florists racing through the hallways. A string quartet rehearsing in the courtyard. And the staff manager was barking orders like they were preparing for war. "Listen up," the woman said, her sharp voice cutting through the crowd. "No phones, no photos, no gossip. You do your job and you stay invisible. We are serving royalty today. That means no mistakes." Janelle just nodded. She'd heard it all before. But when she glanced at the guests list on the clipboard as it passed her, she froze. Sebastian Graves. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. The black tech billionaire. Founder of Gravitech. Youngest CEO in Atlanta's history to reach a net worth of $2 billion. The media loved him. Black excellence, they called him. Success story of the decade. And today, he was getting married. To someone who clearly wasn't Ayanna Monroe. Janelle blinked, tucked her name tag tighter into place, and walked toward the service entrance with steady steps. She didn't know it yet, but that day wouldn't just be another shift. It would be the day she stopped being invisible. The day she made the world remember her name. The ballroom looked like something out of a movie. No, better than that. It looked like a dream that had been hand-stitched by designers flown in from Paris and Milan, then dipped in gold, polished with diamonds, and sprayed with imported orchids flown overnight from Thailand. The Polaris Crown Hotel had cleared its top 3 floors for the event. Valet attendants in white gloves greeted guests in tuxedos and sequined gowns. Paparazzi were kept outside the gates, but drones hovered discreetly above, catching glimpses of Atlanta's most anticipated wedding of the year. Inside the grand ballroom, nothing was ordinary. The walls were draped in ivory silk. Every table centerpiece was 6 feet tall and lit from within. Real butterflies, somehow trained not to fly away, flitted between the flowers. The dance floor sparkled with LED lights embedded beneath glass. And in the center, under a massive crystal chandelier, stood a custom-built stage adorned with the initials S and V, Sebastian and Vivian. Sebastian Graves wasn't just any groom. He was Atlanta's prodigy, the youngest black billionaire in the South. founder and CEO of Gravitech, a company that had revolutionized voice-enabled AI across consumer devices. At just 34, he was on Forbes covers, on Time's list of most influential leaders, and practically worshipped in tech and investment circles. To the public, Sebastian was everything the American dream promised. He'd grown up in Vine City, one of Atlanta's poorest neighborhoods. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a hospital janitor. He was valedictorian and then got a full-ride scholarship to MIT. At 25, he launched his company from a studio apartment, and now he was the king of Atlanta's skyline. And today, he was marrying Vivienne Moreau. Vivienne was the opposite of his upbringing, daughter of a French-American real estate magnate. She'd modeled for Burberry at 16, hosted her own lifestyle show at 20, and by 28 had 5 million followers on Instagram. She was graceful and pale-skinned, with icy blue eyes and platinum blonde hair styled into a soft wave. A picture-perfect bride. The media couldn't get enough of them. Power meets elegance, one magazine declared. Black excellence finds its queen, another wrote. But if you looked closer, if you stood in Janelle's shoes, you'd feel something else entirely. It wasn't just wealth, it wasn't just beauty. It was power. Organized, displayed, weaponized. Every chair had been measured and aligned with precision. The champagne had been chilled to a specific degree. Even the scent in the air, a custom floral blend designed by a luxury brand in Dubai, was engineered to impress. But not everyone was there to be impressed. Some were there to be reminded of where they stood, of what they could never touch, of how people like Sebastian could rise from the dirt, but once they did, they rarely looked back. Janelle saw it in the way the black staff were managed, given the lowest roles, the hardest hours, and the least visibility. She saw it in the way the white servers were praised for doing the same tasks she did twice as fast. She saw it in the way one of the guests looked her over as she passed with a tray of champagne, leaned to his friend and muttered, "At least the help looks better dressed than usual." She heard it, she felt it, but she didn't flinch. She just kept walking. The wedding coordinator, a tall woman in a navy blazer with a headset clipped to her ear, handed Janelle her assignment. VIP station, cocktail service, no interaction unless spoken to, no interruptions, no errors. "You represent the hotel," the woman reminded her, "and the hotel has a reputation." Janelle nodded. She was used to following rules, but she also knew when something didn't feel right. As the guests began arriving, actors, politicians, tech moguls, influencers, she felt a subtle tension creeping in. The kind that says, something's not what it seems. The kind that coils beneath your skin and waits for the moment to strike. And then, out of the corner of her eye, Janelle saw her. Not on the guest list, not in designer heels. Wearing a black utility dress, hair pulled back, belly pronounced. Pushing a cart of wine bottles with silent steps. It was her, Ayanna Monroe. And in that moment, even surrounded by silk, gold, and $1 billion worth of pride, Janelle felt something shift in the air. Like a storm was coming, and no chandelier in the world could outshine what was about to happen next. She wasn't supposed to be there. At least, not in that way. Ayanna Monroe pushed the cart with quiet hands, her step steady, her eyes low. Her black slip-resistant shoes barely made a sound on the polished ballroom floor. Her uniform was simple, a black dress, a white collar, and hair pulled back into a neat, tight bun. No jewelry, no makeup, just a woman doing a job. Except she wasn't just a woman, and this wasn't just a job. 7 months pregnant and still carrying trays for the wealthy. That wasn't the life Ayanna had pictured for herself. But when bills stack high and options run low, pride becomes a luxury. She had applied through a third-party staffing agency under a different name, desperate for the paycheck. No one knew who she was, not even the hotel, But Sebastian did. The second his eyes landed on her, something flickered across his face. Not shocked, not regret. Control. Like he already knew this moment would come. He didn't say a word, not right away. Just raised his champagne flute and smiled. That kind of smile that isn't warm. It's a dare, a challenge. And Ayanna, to her credit, didn't blink. She kept moving, cart to table, wine to station, eyes down, chest up. But Janelle saw it all. From across the room, she watched as the air shifted between the two. She didn't know the full story yet, but her gut told her enough. This wasn't a random employee walking into a high-profile wedding. This was personal, intimate, dangerous. Ayanna's presence was like a ripple in the fabric of the event. Some guests glanced at her belly, then quickly looked away, unsure of whether to stare or pretend she wasn't there. A few whispered. One woman leaned toward her husband and asked, "Wasn't that his ex?" The man shrugged. "Could be. I heard she disappeared after the breakup. Who knows?" But Janelle noticed something else. The staff. The way they avoided her. The way the catering lead clenched his jaw every time Ayanna passed. Like they were under orders not to ask questions. Janelle had worked enough shifts to know when someone was out of place. And Ayanna, no matter how calm she looked, was out of place in every possible way. She didn't belong in that ballroom, and yet she did. Not because of the uniform she wore, but because of the man standing under the chandelier, the same man she once shared a home with. A future. A child. Janelle found herself refilling champagne glasses without even thinking. Her mind kept drifting back to the woman with the wine cart. There was a tension between Ayanna and Sebastian that couldn't be masked by music or decor. Something raw, unresolved. And then it happened. Ayanna stepped too close to the head table, just for a moment. One of the servers had missed a glass, and Ayanna, being the professional she was, moved to fix it. Reflex, not intention. But as she leaned down to pour, Sebastian spoke. "Careful now," he said, his voice smooth but loud enough to be heard. "Wouldn't want to drop anything again." The room paused, just slightly. Like everyone knew something had just happened, but they couldn't quite place it. Ayanna straightened, said nothing. Her eyes met his for less than a second, then looked away. But it was Janelle who caught the weight of it. That tone, that edge, it was familiar. The way people with power test those without, just to remind them who's holding the strings. Janelle knew it well. She'd felt it on buses, in break rooms, and at front desks. It was the look that said, "You're lucky to be here." The tone that whispered, "Don't forget your place." Ayanna hadn't forgotten. She just wasn't afraid anymore. And as the reception rolled forward, as photographers clicked and speeches began, something inside Janelle shifted. She didn't know this woman, didn't know her story, but she knew this feeling. Injustice has a scent. You can smell it before it shows its face. And that night, it reeked of roses, champagne, and silence. Long before the champagne towers, before the magazine covers, before the private jets and luxury ballrooms, there was a basement apartment on Holloway Street. One bedroom, no AC. Roaches that danced across the floor if you turned the lights on too fast. That's where it started. Ayanna met Sebastian when he was nobody. Back then, he was just Seb, the kid who borrowed Wi-Fi from the laundromat across the street. He worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store and coded during the day on a beat-up Dell with a cracked screen. Dreamed big, ate cheap, slept less. Ayanna? She was studying nursing at Clark Atlanta, took night classes, nannied during the day. Smart, focused, soft-spoken. The kind of woman who made people feel safe without saying a word. She had plans too. Not for fame or headlines, but for a life she could call her own. They met at a coffee shop that didn't even have seats. She paid for his coffee when his card got declined. He tried to pay her back the next day. She refused. Instead, they sat on the curb, sipped lukewarm lattes, and talked until the sun dipped behind the buildings. That was the beginning. For 3 years, they were inseparable. Ayanna watched him build Gravitech from scratch. She was there when the code crashed, when investors passed, when bank accounts dipped into the red. She cooked him meals from food stamps, printed resumes for him at school, held him when the stress gave him migraines. She believed in him before anyone else did. And when things finally started to turn around, when his app got picked up by a major startup incubator and the checks started rolling in, she was still there, quietly proud, never asking for more than love, respect, and honesty. But success has a way of changing people. Sebastian didn't shift all at once. It started small. New clothes, new friends. There was a new tone in his voice when he said her name. A hesitation when she reached for his hand in public. The way he started correcting how she spoke in front of colleagues. Don't say ain't, it sounds ghetto. Or maybe let me handle the business dinner, babe. They're used to a certain type of presentation. Ayanna felt it, the slow erasure. He'd whisper that she was too good for those old dreams, that nursing wasn't ambitious enough, that she didn't need to work anymore now that he was building something bigger. But what he really meant was, you no longer fit where I'm going. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday. She planned to tell him that night, bought baby shoes, wrote a little note that said, we're growing something even better than Gravitech. But he came home late, tipsy, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. And when she finally told him, he didn't say a word, just stared, and walked out. 2 days later, he left a check on the counter and a typed letter. This isn't part of the plan. I'm sorry. No name. No return address. He didn't even say goodbye. Ayanna moved out quietly, left behind the apartment they'd built together, found a tiny studio in the West End, started taking night shifts at a clinic and doing odd jobs to keep the lights on. She never told anyone who the father was, not even her friends. Because shame, when served cold by someone you once loved, has a weight silence can barely carry. And yet, she carried it. She carried the belly, the debt, the ache, but she didn't let it break her. Janelle learned all this in pieces, between refills, between glances, between moments when Ayanna's eyes would drift off, as if revisiting a place that only existed in memory. They had a few seconds alone near the back prep area, no guests, no management. Janelle handed her a bottle of water. You okay? She asked softly. Ayanna nodded, then paused. I used to love this hotel, she whispered. We used to walk past it and dream. Janelle didn't ask more, didn't press, but she understood. She understood what it meant to dream with someone, only to be erased from the dream. And for the rest of the night, as speeches echoed and lights shimmered and laughter filled the air, Janelle stayed alert. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay quiet. Sometimes it walks back in, pregnant, exhausted, and carrying a truth no tuxedo can outshine. It didn't happen all at once. Tension never does. It creeps in, quiet and unnoticed, until suddenly it owns the room. The wedding reception was in full swing. Laughter bounced off the chandeliered ceilings, champagne flowed like river water. The violinist played soft renditions of R&B classics while servers moved with mechanical precision through the crowd. Everything looked great to someone who wasn't trained, but Janelle felt the shift long before it showed itself. It started with Sebastian. He was performing, toasting guests, smiling for photos, and dancing with his new bride like he didn't have a care in the world. But every so often, his eyes would dart across the room, always toward Ayanna. Not with guilt, not with regret, but with possession. The kind of look that said, I still control the narrative. Janelle clocked it instantly. She'd seen that look before. On bosses, on teachers, on men who thought status excused cruelty. It was the look of someone who didn't fear consequences because the world had always protected them from consequences. Vivian, his new wife, remained blissfully unaware. She clinked glasses, laughed too loudly, and posed for photos with her hand carefully draped over Sebastian's chest. To her, Ayanna was just another server, a background detail in a night meant to showcase perfection. But not everyone was blind. Some of the older guests started whispering. "Is that the ex?" one woman asked, leaning into her martini glass. "Sure looks like it," another replied. "Did you hear she's pregnant? Scandalous. She should have stayed home." That's when the joke started. Cruel, small, but loud enough to reach the staff. She should have worn Spanx. Maybe the baby's not even his. She's probably just here to cause a scene. Ayanna heard them. Janelle knew she did. But the woman never broke stride, never let the words land. She just kept doing her job, pouring drinks, clearing plates, and smiling when necessary. But Janelle's grip on her tray was starting to tighten. And then it escalated. It happened near the end of the best man's speech. The crowd was loose now, tipsy, the kind of rich drunk where people think they're funnier than they are, the kind of drunk that forgets who's watching. The best man, Derek Hayes, a venture capitalist with a too tight suit and too loud voice, raised his glass and said, "Let's also give a round of applause to all the amazing staff tonight, especially the ones who brought a little extra baggage to the event." A few people laughed. Most just froze. Sebastian didn't correct him, didn't flinch. He smiled. Ayanna's face didn't change, but Janelle saw her hands. They trembled slightly as she lifted a tray of glasses. It was small, subtle, but enough. Janelle stepped in, walked beside her, pretended to adjust the tray. "You good?" she asked under her breath. Ayanna nodded but didn't speak. That was answer enough. And then Sebastian rose to speak. He clinked his fork against his glass, signaling silence. The room obeyed. The music faded. All eyes turned toward the man at the center of it all. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, voice smooth like a practiced monologue. "This day is about love, about legacy, about new beginnings." He wrapped an arm around Vivian's waist and kissed her cheek. "But," he continued, "as we toast to the future, let's also acknowledge the past." He turned slightly. His eyes landed on Ayanna. Janelle's stomach dropped. "Ayanna," he said, gesturing with his champagne flute, "you've always been passionate, headstrong, determined, and tonight, even though you weren't invited as a guest, you still found a way to show up." That's commitment. Gasps flickered around the room. Vivian's smile faltered. Sebastian kept going. "Let's all raise a glass to the people who prepare us for greatness, even if they can't come with us when we arrive." It wasn't a speech, it was a slap, and Ayanna took it standing. Janelle couldn't believe it. She scanned the crowd. Phones were out, faces were pale, but no one moved. Ayanna slowly set down her tray, stepped back from the table, and turned to walk away. And that's when Sebastian did it. He reached out, grabbed the back of her dress, and tore it. The fabric ripped like paper. The room exploded. Some screamed. Others gasped. Champagne spilled. One woman dropped her purse. Ayanna stood frozen, belly exposed, skin glowing under the lights. But her eyes dry. Because she wasn't ashamed. She was finished. And so was Janelle. Because in that moment, watching a woman stripped of dignity under a chandelier meant to symbolize love, she knew silence was no longer an option. For a split second, the entire room fell into a silence so thick it felt like gravity had doubled. Ayanna stood there, frozen in time. Her torn dress hung in ribbons. Her pregnant belly was exposed beneath the ballroom lights. Shoulders pulled back, chin high. But behind her eyes was a storm. Not shame, not fear, something more dangerous. And still, no one moved. Sebastian stood just a few feet away, still holding a shred of the fabric in his hand, like a trophy. His face blank, cold, as if what just happened was perfectly normal. As if Ayana wasn't a woman, just another object in his way. Vivian backed away slowly, confusion written all over her face, but she didn't say a word. Guests stared, phones were out, whispers swirled like wildfire. Someone laughed, one of those uncomfortable chuckles that tries to hide discomfort behind cruelty. But most just watched. And then, without drama or warning, Janelle stepped forward. No spotlight, no music, just a girl in a red vest and black apron moving with the calm of someone who had finally reached the edge of her silence. She didn't shout, she didn't point, she simply walked. Through rows of stunned guests, around spilled drinks and dropped phones, toward Ayana. Her heart was hammering, but her face didn't show it. Her hands didn't shake. Her walk was smooth, deliberate, and slow. Because the thing about standing up, it's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet but unstoppable. Janelle reached Ayana and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Then, in one motion, she untied her apron, reached up, and draped it gently around Ayana's waist. No words yet, just dignity. Returned. She turned to face the crowd. "I think that's enough," Janelle said, voice even but firm. No one replied. Sebastian scoffed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Janelle replied, locking eyes with him. "This isn't power. This isn't love. This is cruelty dressed in a tuxedo." A few gasps, a few camera clicks. She wasn't yelling, but every word hit like thunder. "I came here tonight to work, to serve, to stay invisible like we're always told to. But this," she motioned to Ayana, "this is not something I can serve. This is where I draw the line." Sebastian smirked. "Who do you think you are?" Janelle tilted her head slightly. "I'm someone you didn't expect to speak." She turned to the room. "To all of you filming right now, ask yourselves what you're capturing. Is it just gossip to post tomorrow? Or are you watching a man destroy someone's dignity in real time?" People started lowering their phones. Janelle continued. "This woman carried your CEO when he had nothing, fed him, believed in him. And when she became inconvenient, when her belly no longer fit his brand, she threw her out like trash. And tonight, he tried to finish the job." She paused, breathing steadily. "But not today." Ayana, still silent, looked at Janelle, eyes wide, full of something more than shock. Gratitude. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, from relief. Janelle turned back to Sebastian. "Men like you hide behind wealth, behind charm, but you can't buy back character. You either have it or you don't." Sebastian laughed once, a dry, empty sound. "Security," he called out, glancing toward the side of the ballroom. But no one moved. Janelle looked toward the waitstaff, the bartenders, and the other servers. Some had stopped working. Some had tears in their eyes. One man, a bartender in his 50s, gave her a slow, subtle nod. She turned back to the crowd. "You all came here to celebrate love," she said, voice rising slightly now, filled with conviction. "But what kind of love humiliates a woman in front of hundreds just to prove a point? What kind of man does this to the mother of his child and still calls himself a leader?" She paused, breathing steadily. "But not today." Ayana, still silent, looked at Janelle, eyes wide, full of something more than shock. Gratitude. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, from relief. Janelle turned back to Sebastian. "Men like you hide behind wealth, behind charm, but you can't buy back character. You either have it or you don't." Sebastian laughed once, a dry, empty sound. "Security," he called out, glancing toward the side of the ballroom. But no one moved. Janelle looked toward the waitstaff, the bartenders, and the other servers. Some had stopped working. Some had tears in their eyes. One man, a bartender in his 50s, gave her a slow, subtle nod. She turned back to the crowd. "You all came here to celebrate love," she said, voice rising slightly now, filled with conviction. "But what kind of love humiliates a woman in front of hundreds just to prove a point? What kind of man does this to the mother of his child and still calls himself a leader?" Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's right." Another said, "I had no idea." And then a single clap from the back, then another and another, until the ballroom echoed with applause. Not wild, not chaotic, but deliberate, rising like a slow wave of reckoning. Sebastian looked around, disbelief etched into his face. Vivian stepped away from him. Ayanna stood taller. And Janelle stayed where she was. She hadn't just stood up for Ayanna. She'd stood up for every woman who's ever been silenced, for every black girl told to know her place, for every worker told to smile and be quiet. And though she didn't plan it, she had just become the voice that cracked the ceiling. The applause didn't last long. It never does when people start realizing what they're clapping for. Because beneath the surface of that polite noise, beneath the pearls and bow ties and polished smiles, something ancient stirred, something raw, something people didn't like to talk about unless it was safe or sanitized. Race. Not the kind they celebrate on magazine covers with words like diversity and inspiration. The real kind. The kind that slips into voices, that hides in laughter, that sharpens side comments like knives. And in that ballroom, surrounded by millions of dollars of decor, wine, and press, it was about to erupt. The first voice came from a woman at table 3, blonde, mid-40s, clutching a glass of rosé like it was a lifeline. "I mean, she's just a waitress," she said to no one in particular, loud enough to be heard. "This is what happens when you let them speak out of turn." The word "them" wasn't ambiguous. A man next to her chuckled. "They're always angry. You give them a uniform and suddenly they think they run the place." Janelle heard it. So did Ayanna. But they weren't surprised. This wasn't new. Another voice chimed in, younger this time, a guy in a navy blazer. "I thought this was a wedding, not a protest." Someone else said, "Maybe if she dressed more professionally, this wouldn't have happened." The comments rolled out like poison, soft and slippery, dressed up in Southern politeness, but sharp underneath. And then the silence cracked again. This time from a young black woman seated at the back of the room, a guest, not staff, maybe a cousin, maybe a friend, maybe just someone who had finally had enough. She stood up. "Did y'all hear yourselves?" she asked, her voice calm but unshakable. She didn't storm the stage. She didn't cause a scene. She stood beside a woman who was being humiliated, and she did it with grace. "And that scares you?" The blonde woman scoffed. "It's not about race, it's about respect." "No," the woman replied. "It's always about race. You just get uncomfortable when someone points it out." Murmurs rippled. Tension thickened. Janelle remained still, eyes scanning the room. This wasn't just about Ayanna anymore. This was about every time she'd been followed in a store. Every time someone told her she was articulate for a black girl. Every time she'd been told to smile, to soften her voice, to stay in her lane. And now, all of it was bubbling to the surface. Vivian, still standing near Sebastian, finally spoke. "Sebastian," she said, her voice trembling, "is this true? Is this woman carrying your child?" He hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without saying a word. Vivian turned away. The sound that came from the crowd was part gasp, part growl. Someone whispered, "He used her." Another said, "He erased her." And then the racial lines in the room became visible in ways money could no longer cover. White guests shifted uncomfortably. Black guests stood taller. The staff, mostly black and brown, watched from the sidelines, shoulders pulled back a little further now. Because when one of their own had finally spoken, the world didn't collapse. It cracked open. And through that crack, the truth poured in. One guest tried to defend Sebastian, a white man in a gray suit. "Let's not make this about color," he said. "Let's focus on the bigger picture." A server near him responded without looking up. "It's always been about color. You just had the luxury to ignore it." No yelling, no chaos, just truth, finally spoken out loud. Ayanna looked at Janelle and whispered, "Thank you." But Janelle didn't answer, because her work wasn't done. She stepped forward again, facing the crowd. "I'm not here to make you comfortable," she said. "I'm here to tell the truth. And if that truth makes you squirm, maybe it's time to ask yourself why." No one argued, not anymore. Because once the silence breaks, once people start listening, there's no going back. The room had changed. Sebastian Graves was no longer the center of attention. Now the focus was on a young black woman with nothing to gain and everything to risk, who spoke anyway. And in that moment, the wedding that was supposed to showcase status and perfection became something else entirely, a reckoning. Janelle didn't cry easily. Not because she was cold, not because she didn't feel things, but because she'd learned early on that tears were a luxury, and in her world, luxuries weren't always safe. She was 8 when she first realized what it meant to be invisible and hypervisible at the same time. It was a Tuesday. Her mom, Danielle Carter, had brought her to work, cleaning houses in the nicer neighborhoods of North Buckhead. Wealthy clients, gated driveways, lawns trimmed like golf courses. The kind of homes where the delivery drivers weren't allowed past the second step. Janelle sat on the stairs, coloring quietly, while her mom dusted baseboards and cleaned windows that already sparkled. The homeowner's daughter came downstairs, blonde, maybe 9, wearing ballet slippers and a tiara like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. She asked Janelle what she was drawing. Janelle smiled. A unicorn. The girl peered over her shoulder, nose wrinkled. "Unicorns aren't brown," she said. "They're white and sparkly." Before Janelle could answer, the girl grabbed the crayon and snapped it in half. Her mom didn't say sorry. She didn't even look back. She just called, "Sweetie, come upstairs now." And that was the end of it. Janelle remembered holding the broken crayon in her hand, not because it was her favorite, but because in that moment, she understood something. Some people thought the world didn't belong to her. Her mom had seen it too. Danielle rushed over, scooped up Janelle's drawing and whispered, "Don't let their words shrink you." But that wasn't the last time it happened. There were the teachers who always assumed she was cheating if she scored too high. The store clerk who followed her around the aisle, pretending to reorganize every time she moved. The girl in high school who touched Janelle's curls without asking, then laughed when she flinched. "You're so sensitive," the girl said. "It's just hair." Janelle had learned how to push it all down. She got good at smiling when she felt like screaming, at saying "no worries" when she wanted to ask, "Would you say that to anyone else?" College wasn't much better. At Georgia State, she was one of the few black students in her communications seminars. Whenever race came up, the class would turn to her like she had the answer key. As if being black meant she owed them an explanation for every injustice. She worked 2 jobs to keep her place off campus, cleaned offices on the weekends, waited tables at night, still managed straight A's, still showed up to every shift, still smiled. Because survival required more than hard work, it required invisibility. Until today. Because today she had watched a man rip the dignity off a woman who had already lost too much. And when no one else moved, when the guests, the staff, and the cameras all hesitated, something inside her snapped. But it wasn't anger that pushed her forward. It was a memory. It was her mother's voice in her ear. "Be twice as good, baby, and never let 'em see you break." It was the broken crayon in her hand, the silence in that classroom, the locker room jokes, the tips she never got, the compliments that came with a warning, "You're pretty for a black girl." All of it had led to this moment. And when she stood beside Ayanna, when she wrapped her apron around her waist and met the eyes of the man who thought he could humiliate anyone he pleased, she wasn't just a server. She was the sum of every step it took to get there. Janelle Carter had grown up learning how to carry weight. But today, she wasn't carrying it alone. Today, she was shifting it. And though she didn't know where this would lead, what headlines would follow, what people would say, or how the world might twist her story, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wasn't going back. Not to silence, not to shrink, not to pretend like dignity was something you earned with a title or a tuxedo. Because in that moment, with the ballroom holding its breath and the lights burning too bright, she felt something rare. Power. Not borrowed, not given, claimed. The moment Janelle stopped speaking, there was silence. Not the awkward kind, not the kind that begged for someone to change the subject. It was the kind of silence that followed truth. Heavy, sacred, final. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom stood still. Waiters frozen mid-step. Guests locked in place, eyes darting between Janelle and Sebastian, between Ayanna and the camera still recording. And then, almost like clockwork, phones lit up. Screens were unlocked. Videos were reviewed, sent, posted. And within minutes, the ballroom wasn't just filled with stunned whispers and shifting glances. It was filled with a soft hum of impact. Because while Sebastian had spent years crafting a public image, Janelle had just shattered it with 2 minutes of raw, unfiltered honesty. The first post hit Twitter before dessert was even served. A guest sitting near the back had caught the entire thing. Janelle walking forward, the ripped dress, the confrontation, and the apron being draped around Ayanna's waist. The video was grainy, but the audio was clear. This isn't power. This is cruelty dressed in a tuxedo. The caption read, "Black waitress just destroyed a billionaire at his own wedding. You have to watch this." Within 5 minutes, it had 1,000 retweets. 10 minutes later, it was trending. Hashtags started to emerge. Hashtag stand with Janelle. Hashtag Ayanna deserved better. Graves of privilege. This is Black excellence. Inside the ballroom, guests were still reeling, but outside, on the internet, a storm was gathering. Influencers reposted the clip. Activists shared it with commentary. Former employees of GraveTech began speaking up. One woman tweeted, "Worked under Sebastian for 2 years. What did you see tonight? That's the real him." Even a major news outlet picked it up before midnight. Waitress goes viral for calling out billionaire CEO at lavish wedding. But Janelle didn't know any of this yet. She was still in the room, still standing next to Ayanna, hand gently on her back, steady as the chaos tried to reform itself. Sebastian stood motionless, staring at the phones pointed in his direction like weapons. And for the first time that night, he looked small. Vivian stepped away from him, her face unreadable. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just looked at Ayanna and said softly, "I didn't know." Ayanna nodded once, no hate in her eyes, just tiredness, and the quiet dignity of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Janelle turned toward the staff entrance, helping guide Ayanna out of the spotlight. But before they could slip away, someone blocked their path. Not security, not a guest. A young woman, black, mid-20s, camera in hand, stood in front of them. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, "but can I hug you?" Ayanna blinked. Janelle hesitated, and then nodded. The woman wrapped her arms around both of them, tears falling down her cheeks. "My mom was Ayanna. I was almost Janelle. Thank you, both of you." More guests stepped forward, one by one. A man handed Ayanna his coat. A woman offered Janelle her business card. Another staff member, someone from the kitchen, peeked out and gave her a fist pump. Something had shifted. Janelle didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like a voice. And as they reached the staff hallway, Ayanna whispered, "You didn't have to do that." Janelle looked at her and said, "I did, because if I didn't, someone else would have ended up standing here tomorrow." They stepped through the door and left the ballroom behind, but their words their presence, their defiance, that stayed. It pulsed through every phone still glowing, through every caption, every repost, every stitch and share and comment, because something rare had happened. Not just a viral moment, not just a wedding scandal, a reminder that when truth is spoken, not screamed, not staged, just spoken, it cuts through everything. Status, wealth, fear, power. And it spreads like fire, like freedom. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Sebastian Graves had built an empire off control, of perception, of people, of narrative. For years, he had crafted an image that was almost bulletproof, young, brilliant, charismatic, the face of modern tech. He was invited to speak at Ivy League schools, awarded humanitarian honors, and featured on magazine covers under headlines like Self-Made Titan and The Future of Black Leadership. But all of that was before Janelle's voice echoed through the ballroom, before the video hit 10 million views, before the screenshots surfaced. Because while Sebastian stood frozen in front of guests with cameras in their hands, the rest of the internet was digging. And it didn't take long for the pieces to come together. One of Ayana's friends, someone who had helped her through the worst of the breakup, had kept everything. The texts, the voicemails, the photos. The paper trail Sebastian thought he'd buried. Screenshots began appearing online. First, a message sent from Sebastian to Ayana just weeks after she told him she was pregnant. "You knew this wasn't part of the deal. I gave you money. I gave you a clean exit. Don't ruin what I'm building." Another from just last month. "If you show up anywhere near this wedding, I swear to God, you'll regret it." And then came the voice memo. His voice, calm, measured, cold. "I made you. I don't owe you anything. You had your chance, Ayana. Stay in your lane." It was the kind of evidence that couldn't be spun, not even by the best PR team in Silicon Valley. Within hours, the hashtags weren't just trending, they were dominating. Hashtag GravesFall. Believe Ayana. Cancel GraveTech. Investors panicked. The board of directors at GraveTech held an emergency meeting by sunrise. By noon, an official statement was released. "We are conducting an immediate internal investigation and placing CEO Sebastian Graves on indefinite leave, effective immediately." Stocks plummeted. Brand partnerships vanished overnight. A luxury watch company that had just launched a campaign featuring Sebastian pulled the ads by morning. A major tech conference removed him from the speaker lineup. And a university that had awarded him an honorary doctorate issued a public denouncement. It was swift, public, unforgiving, and for the first time in his life, Sebastian couldn't talk his way out of it. At home, the front gates of his Buckhead mansion were swarmed by reporters. His social media accounts were locked. Anonymous posts started leaking internal memos from his office, emails that revealed a pattern of abuse, intimidation, and coercion. Ayana, meanwhile, was offered legal representation pro bono from a coalition of civil rights lawyers. The footage of her being humiliated, combined with the leaked messages, was enough to build a serious case. And not just for defamation or emotional damage. There were financial threats, potential NDA violations, even a question of unlawful retaliation. Sebastian's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. But the real blow didn't come from lawyers or headlines. It came from the people closest to him. Vivian packed her things the next day. She left without drama. No press conference, no statement. Just a quiet ride out of the mansion and a single post on Instagram. Some betrayals are louder than words. "I believe women. I believe in truth." His assistant resigned. His driver quit. Even his publicist, the woman who once called him the Barack Obama of tech, cut ties. The man who once walked into rooms like gravity followed him now stood alone. And still, he didn't speak. No apology, no denial, just silence, which, in the court of public opinion, was its own kind of confession. The narrative had changed. Sebastian Graves was no longer a symbol of progress. He was a warning. Proof that success without character is just a louder kind of failure. That no matter how high you rise, if you build it on silence, manipulation, and fear, it only takes one voice to bring it down. And that voice, this time, didn't come from a CEO, a billionaire, or a politician. It came from a waitress. It started small, a single comment on a video post. How can I help her? Then another. Is there a GoFundMe for Ayanna? And then another. Does anyone know Janelle's Cash App? It didn't take long before support turned into action. By the next morning, the story wasn't just viral, it was everywhere. Not just a trending topic, not just another scandal. It had become a movement. Because this wasn't just about Sebastian anymore. It was about every woman who had been pushed aside and told to stay quiet. Every black mother who had been left out of the narrative. Every worker who had been told, it's just business. Ayanna became a symbol, but not the tragic kind, not the victim. The survivor. The mother. The woman who showed up and stood tall, even when the room tried to erase her. Donations flooded in. A group of black women lawyers launched a legal fund in Ayanna's name, the Monroe Defense Initiative. Within 48 hours, it had raised over $200,000, enough to cover her housing, medical bills, and long-term legal protection. Church groups reached out, offering baby supplies, home-cooked meals, and rides to doctor appointments. One woman donated a year of free doula services. Another, a therapist, offered weekly sessions. No charge, just respect. Community centers that had never even met Ayanna shared her story. A grocery chain pledged to deliver food to her address every week for the rest of her pregnancy. And it wasn't just about charity. It was about honoring someone who had been ignored for too long. Then there was Janelle. Nobody could find her at first. She wasn't online posting about what happened. She didn't show up for interviews. She had taken a step back from the spotlight, unsure if her voice had done more harm than good. But the community wasn't going to let her disappear. Her name was trending. People were creating artwork of her draping the apron over Ayanna's waist. Black poets wrote verses about her courage. Young girls in school shared her video and called her the waitress who became a warrior. Someone made a shirt that said, "I'm with Janelle." Proceeds went to a scholarship fund for first-generation black college students. Local reporters dug up more on her. Not scandal, not secrets, but praise. Her former professors described her as brilliant, bold, and deeply empathetic. Employers called her a natural leader. Her grandmother, when finally reached for comment, simply said, "She's always been this way. Y'all just finally saw it." And then came the job offers. Media outlets, nonprofits, corporate social responsibility teams looking for real voices. Even a political campaign reached out, asking if she'd consider community organizing. But Janelle wasn't chasing clout. She turned down every offer, every check, every interview, until one request came through that made her pause. It was from a woman named Dr. Kamaria Benson, founder of the Black Women's Empowerment Collective, a former journalist, now turned community leader. Her message was simple. We don't want to use your voice. We want to amplify it. Are you ready to teach others how to do what you did? Janelle took a deep breath and finally said yes, because it was never about one moment in one ballroom. It was about what came next, the ripple, the rebuild. Ayanna and Janelle were no longer alone. They were now part of something bigger, something based on sisterhood, justice, and truth. One evening, a small community event was held in South Atlanta. It wasn't fancy. Folding chairs, a borrowed mic, a local park that still had patchy grass and old playground swings. Ayanna showed up, 7 months pregnant, wearing a simple blue dress and sneakers. Janelle walked beside her, in jeans and a white tee that said, "Truth is power." No makeup, no filters, just presence. And when it was Janelle's turn to speak, she didn't tell the crowd to cheer. She didn't tell them what to believe. She just said, "I wasn't brave because I wanted to be. I was brave because silence wasn't an option anymore." Ayanna reached for her hand, and the crowd stood up. not just for them, but for themselves. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is showing up for each other. The hospital room was quiet, soft beeping from a nearby monitor, a warm breeze slipping through a cracked window, the scent of lavender lotion on clean white sheets. Ayanna lay back in the bed, exhausted but glowing. Her baby girl, wrapped in a pink blanket with tiny elephants, slept soundly against her chest, one tiny hand curled around Ayanna's finger. Her name was Liberty, not because it sounded pretty, not because it was trendy, but because that's what Ayanna felt the moment she held her daughter for the first time, free. Not from struggle, but from silence, from shame, from the weight of trying to be invisible in a world that had already decided what she was worth. There was a knock at the door. Ayanna looked up. Janelle stepped inside slowly, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers in one hand and a reusable grocery bag full of snacks in the other. "I didn't know what kind you liked," she said softly, "so I got every flavor of granola bar." Ayanna smiled. "That's exactly what I needed." They stood there for a moment, unsure of how to begin. Then Janelle walked over, set the flowers on the windowsill, and sat down beside the bed. Ayanna reached for her hand. "I've been thinking about this moment," Ayanna said, voice low, "about what I'd say, about how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Janelle replied. "You stood longer than anyone should have ever had to." Ayanna looked down at Liberty, gently brushing a finger across her daughter's cheek. "She's going to grow up in a world where people will still try to put her in a box," Ayanna said, "but she'll know better, because of what you did." Janelle's eyes filled, but she blinked it back. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. Ayanna shook her head. "You started something, Janelle, something real. You didn't just protect me. You reminded people that silence is a choice, and you chose different." Janelle smiled, then leaned forward, placing a soft kiss on Liberty's tiny forehead. "She's beautiful," she said. "She's strong," Ayanna replied, "like the woman who stood up for her before she was even born." They sat like that for a while, with no rush to fill the silence. Outside the hospital window, the city moved like always, cars passing, horns honking, lives continuing. But inside that room, something sacred was happening. Not a headline, not a viral video, a healing. Ayanna finally asked, "What now? What comes next for you?" Janelle looked out the window, then back at Liberty. "I think I want to help other women find their voice. Maybe start a workshop, go back to school, speak, teach, something that feels like building instead of surviving." Ayanna nodded. "You'll be amazing at it." Janelle hesitated. "Do you think people will listen?" Ayanna squeezed her hand. "They already are." Before Janelle left, she pulled a folded note from her back pocket and handed it to Ayanna. "I wrote this a few nights ago," she said. "Didn't know when I'd give it to you." Ayanna opened it slowly. A handwritten letter, messy but heartfelt. At the bottom, in bold, underlined words, it read, "You weren't just seen. You were believed." Ayanna's throat tightened. She hugged Janelle, the kind of hug that says everything words can't. And when Janelle walked out of that hospital room, the sunlight hit her face differently. Not brighter, but clearer. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from revenge or exposure or applause. It comes from connection, from the simple, sacred act of choosing to show up for one another, again and again, even after the camera stopped rolling. 1 month after the wedding, a community forum was held at a local church in Southwest Atlanta. It wasn't fancy. No red carpet, no reporters waiting outside. Just folding chairs, a borrowed microphone, and people who wanted to talk, honestly, openly, about what had happened. The room was filled with teachers, students, single moms, retired folks, and small business owners, black, brown, and white. A mix of people and stories, all brought together by one viral moment that made people think about race, power, dignity, and responsibility. Ayanna was present, so was Janelle. They sat quietly in the front row, heads slightly bowed as others spoke. One woman shared how she'd been passed over for promotions for years. Another man described watching his sister hide her pregnancy for fear of losing her job. Teenagers talked about growing up without examples of leadership that looked like them or honored them. And then, someone from the back stood up, a woman in her late 60s, gray coils tucked beneath a modest scarf, a deep blue sweater, no jewelry. Her voice, soft but steady, floated to the front of the room as she spoke. "My name is Loretta Graves," she said. The room fell silent. Even Ayanna turned, eyebrows raised. Because Graves wasn't just a coincidence. Loretta nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm Sebastian's mother." All eyes were on her now. Janelle sat upright, unsure what would come next. "I debated coming today," Loretta continued, "because I didn't know if I had the right. I didn't know if my presence would help or hurt. But I couldn't sit with my silence any longer." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "I raised Sebastian by myself. We didn't have much. I worked nights at the hospital, cleaning floors, changing sheets, and watching people pretend not to see me. I did everything I could to give that boy a future." She paused and looked directly at Ayanna. "I remember when he brought you home. You were kind, gentle, real. I saw how you looked at him. Like he was more than his ambition." Ayanna swallowed hard but didn't look away. Loretta took a breath. "When he made it, when the money came and the camera showed up, he changed. I told myself it was just pressure or growing pains. But deep down, I saw it. The way he spoke to women, the way he stopped calling me, the pride that turned into something sharp." Her hands trembled now. "When I saw that video, what he did to you, what he said, I broke." You could have heard a pin drop in that church. "I'm not here to excuse him," she said. "I'm here to apologize. Because somewhere along the way, I raised a son who forgot how to honor women, especially Black women, and that shame lives with me." Ayanna's eyes were full now. Janelle had a hand pressed to her chest. Loretta looked at them both. "You deserved better. From him, from the system, from the world. And while I can't undo what was done, I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life using my voice to make sure women like you are not forgotten." A few people in the room started clapping, not the polite kind, the slow, rising kind. Ayanna stood and walked toward her. They hugged, two women from two generations, bound not by blood, but by truth. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close, something healing. Because sometimes the most powerful twist isn't a scandal. It's a confession, a reckoning, a mother choosing to break a cycle her son refused to face. And in that moment, Loretta Graves didn't speak as the mother of a billionaire. She spoke as a woman who knew what silence cost. Time passed, not fast, not loud, but steady. A year after that wedding, the world had moved on in some ways, but not entirely. Sebastian Graves faded from headlines. His empire, once untouchable, had been sold off in pieces. A name once worshipped in business schools was now a cautionary tale. But Ayanna, she rose. She opened a small nonprofit called Rising Mothers, a support network for single moms, especially women of color who had been pushed aside by broken systems. It offered childcare, resume coaching, housing referrals, and a space to heal. Her daughter, Liberty, learned to walk early, talk early too. Her first word was mama. Her second was no. Ayanna kept the apron Janelle wrapped around her that night, framed it, hung it above her desk, a symbol not of shame, but of protection, of sisterhood. Janelle? She stepped into her voice fully. She led workshops on workplace equity, wrote op-eds, and traveled across the country speaking about truth, courage, and what it meant to break silence with integrity. But she didn't seek fame. That was never the point. When asked why she did what she did, she always said the same thing: because no one else was moving, and I couldn't stay still. The video still lived online. It had racked up over 90 million views across platforms. But it wasn't just a moment anymore. It had become a reminder that dignity doesn't come from your job title, that leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the first to step forward when others freeze, that power without accountability is just polished cruelty, and that sometimes the person with the least privilege in the room is the one who ends up protecting everyone else. In the end, this story wasn't about a billionaire's fall. It was about two women, one carrying a child, the other carrying truth, who refused to be invisible. It was about the strength it takes to speak up and the community that rises when we listen. And maybe, just maybe, it's about all of us. Because if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever swallowed your voice because you were afraid no one would believe you, if you've ever stood in the back waiting for the right time to step forward, let this be your sign. The world doesn't change from the top down. It changes when everyday people in everyday clothes decide that enough is enough. So wherever you are right now, in your car, on your couch, at your job, know this: your voice matters, your story matters, and someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to speak. Because silence may protect systems, but truth saves people. If this story moved you even a little, take a moment to share it. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, not just to support the creator, but to remind the algorithm that stories like this matter. And if no one's told you this today, you are not invisible. You are not small, and your truth is powerful. So hold it, speak it, live it, because you never know who you might be saving simply by standing up.